Throughout 2023, wars have dominated the Western news cycle, from the Russia-Ukraine war to Israel's invasion of Gaza, on top of dozens of other conflicts around the world. In fact, there are more conflicts happening right now than we've seen in a very long time. According to the latest Armed Conflicts report from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, there were an astonishing 183 regional conflicts around the globe. Why are there so many conflicts happening at the moment? Well, there are a few overlapping factors that we're going to look into here. Number 1, territorial disputes. Number 2, the rise of authoritarianism. Number 3, the rise of organized crime. Number 4, the role of armed non-state groups. And number 5, climate change. So let's take the first factor, territorial disputes. Territorial disputes are generally viewed as the most common source of regional conflict. In 2023, we've seen examples of this in Palestine and Ukraine, as well as in Kashmir, the South China Sea, and the Essequibo region between Venezuela and Guyana. Territorial disputes are also incredibly difficult to resolve, and they're the type of conflict most likely to escalate into full-blown interstate wars. In a sense, the war in Ukraine escalated from a regional dispute in 2014 to a full-blown interstate war last year. And the ongoing conflict in Palestine is already starting to spill out into the wider Middle East, sparking tensions on Israel's border with Lebanon and in northern Yemen, where Houthi forces have launched missile and drone attacks on shipping off the coast. Essentially, states were less likely to go to war for their disputed territories in the past because, well, it was very rare. So aggressor states knew that if they tried to use military power to enforce their territorial claims, they'd be subject to widespread international criticism and risk international isolation. However, with big countries like Russia involved in territorial disputes, potential aggressors feel more confident, because they know that their adventures won't garner as much international attention and that there'll always be a club of similar-minded countries to protect them from diplomatic isolation. Territorial disputes often link in with our second factor, which is the rise of authoritarianism. The world is in a so-called prolonged democratic recession, and every year for almost 2 decades more, countries have moved towards authoritarianism than towards democracy. Just look at the devastation in Haiti, Yemen, and Myanmar this year. Moving on to our third factor now, the rise in organized crime. Specifically, illegal arms and drugs trafficking. The 2023 Global Organized Crime Index found that 83% of the world's population live in countries with high crime compared to 79% in 2021. Criminal groups often take advantage of the political instability and commodity shortages caused by conflict, with many of the most crime-affected countries in 2022 being the war-torn countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Myanmar, Ethiopia, and Ukraine. But it also works both ways, as criminal rivalries worsen regional conflicts. Take Latin America, for example, where disputes over drug trafficking routes and networks caused a surge in violence in Ecuador back in July, and fighting over the local drugs market in Costa Rica led to record levels of homicides. Last week, the UN Security Council held a long debate about the serious growing threats posed by transnational organized crime, acknowledging that transnational criminal networks fuel conflict and contribute to the spread of terrorism. Now this leads on to our fourth reason for the rise in regional conflicts, which is the influence of armed non-state groups. Armed groups, including militias, are increasingly driven conflict in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Sahel. Sub-Saharan Africa has seen a 48% increase in fatalities due to armed militia conflicts this year, and is now the region with the greatest annual number of militant attacks globally. While Islamic militants are widespread across Africa in areas with Muslim populations, organized violent groups are concentrated in specific areas like the Sahel, Lake Chad Basin, Somalia, northern Mozambique, and the North Kivu province in the DRC. Fighting between different armed groups, often over territory or ethnic tension, both prolongs existing conflict and triggers new ones.